All right, I think we've got a quorum, so we're going to get this rolling. Welcome everybody to our webinar, Why Blending Matters. I'd like to thank you. This is Lars Leicht. I want to thank you on behalf of the SOMM Journal, SOMM Foundation, and Deutsch Family Wines. I want to remind you that this is being recorded and will be available on the SOMM Journal and SOMM Foundation websites, and surely on the Deutsch Family websites soon, I'm sure, as well. And this will also be, we're also recording right now on Facebook Live, so you can catch us that way, as well as the recording. The printed recap of this webinar will appear in the February 2022 issue of SOMM Journal. You can send greetings via chat, but please, we ask if you have any pointed questions in our Q&A for anybody on our panel, please put them into the Q&A section, and we're going to get rolling. So I first met Theo Rutherford when he was working on the floor of Fiola in DC, Washington, DC. And we got into a discussion on blends. Undoubtedly, it was about a wine that he probably wouldn't buy from me, but I forgive you now, Theo. And we did keep the conversation going. We brought it full circle to our current roles now, heading up education, both of us. I'm with SOMM Journal, and Theo is heading up education for Deutsch Family Wine and Spirits. So Theo quite kindly assembled a brilliant panel to discuss blending from their own unique standpoints. Each of these gentlemen have essentially the same goals in mind, but they work in very different contexts. So we're going to hear a little bit about that. So we have with us James MacPhail, who is deeply rooted in Sonoma, producing critically acclaimed Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, plus his signature blend, Amaro Moon Mountain, for the calling. And if you know me, you know that I love anything that has Amaro in it, or anything, the word Amaro even just gets me going. We also have Glenn Hugo, who is making some authentic small lot, small batch blends for Girard Winery in Napa Valley, sourcing from historic growers and properties based on long relationships that he's built. He's a native Texan, and he comes from the restaurant industry. So something close to all of our hearts here. And last but not least, a man who needs little introduction. I think if you were to go to the dictionary and look up the word flying winemaker, you would get a picture of Michel Rolland. He is the quintessential flying winemaker, world-renowned, and he's here today to talk to us about his point of pride, Clos de la Siete, his ultimate blend from Argentina's Uco Valley. So we're going to just jump in and ask Theo to lead the discussion with these three rock star giants. Take it away, Theo.
Thank you, Lars, and I do forgive. Well, thank you for forgiving me for not buying wine from you a little while ago. But it's been some years and a lot more gray hairs later. But gentlemen, thank you very, very much for joining us. Obviously, James and Glenn right in the middle of harvest, very clearly with Glenn. I really appreciate the colorful attire that you have on for us today. And then Michelle's calling us from Bordeaux, but obviously heavily involved in a whole lot of things everywhere. So today, really what we wanted to talk about was blending and the art of blending, but beyond just what varietals go into the bottle, it means a lot more than that. So James, actually, if you don't mind kicking us off, just in just a couple sentences, what does blending really mean to you when you think about the winemaking process?
Obviously, it's just, it's something that we start thinking about very early on. And that's, when we speak more a little bit later about, the art of blending, in my world of Pinot Noir, I start at the very beginning with vineyards. And that's really when I start to kind of, the wheels start to turn about, what does this eventual blend look like? So starts with the vineyards.
Glenn, I'm going to ask the same question of you.
You there?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
We can hear you. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
First one to mess up. Thank you. I would just add on to James's point about the vineyard, and then take it to the next step, which is where we're at right now. We're in fermentation. As an example, we just got through with a cap swap, something that we like to do often here at Girard. We had a really great Petit Verdot fermentation. It finished up. We pulled all the juice off of that. We left the skins in the tank, and we have some Merlot that needed a little boost, and we put that on top. So blending to me is throughout the whole process. James talked about in the vineyard where it first starts kind of reeling in your mind, but then in harvest and fermentation is kind of the next big step. And then we're going to talk further in a moment about as we age wines as well, and ultimately when we go to put blends together. But I think all of us as winemakers, it's from the day we start tasting grapes all the way through till it hits the bottle.
Wonderful. And Michelle, you've seen more vineyards probably than any of us combined in so many different countries. What does blending mean to you, especially when you're called upon to do something different in a country you may have never been to?
If I can begin joking, I will tell you blending is my cardio. So blending for me is my life, and so I did blend all my life. I began when I was young. Blending was not so fashion, and the people was making one blend, just one, but putting all together and not really thinking to do blending. And by the time blending became more and more sophisticated. And I would like just to say one thing. Some people think when we have just one variety like Pinot Noir, Merlot, or Cabernet Sauvignon, or whatever, we are not doing blending. Yes, we are doing blending, because even with Pinot Noir, we can have different lots of Pinot Noir, we can have different lots of Cabernet Sauvignon, and we are doing blending. So blending is absolutely necessary to make wine. And today, there is a lot of very good blenders, and that's why we have a lot of very, very good wines too.
Wonderful, thank you. So the blending process for all of you, there definitely is a signature style in that. Obviously, you all think about it slightly differently. You're making wines in very different places. So Glenn, I'm going to actually start with you, if you don't mind. When you go through the blending process, what really are you looking for your signature style? What are the things that you do uniquely at Girard? I mean, like the cap swap you just talked about. And if anybody has ever talked to Glenn, this is a guy that talks about Petit Verdot more than anybody I've ever heard of in my life. And it's great. And I love talking about it with him and tasting it with him. But what are those signature wines for you? And what's that signature style for you guys where blending is concerned?
Well, Lars alluded to the fact that I came to this industry from the restaurant industry. So for me, I'm thinking about wine on the dinner table. And I know all the winemakers on this call, they're all foodies as well. And they all grew up with wine on the table. And as it is growing to be part of our culture in America, I love seeing that more and more people are making wine as part of a complement to their cuisine. And with that, as we're blending, we're looking at that balance of acidity, tannin, fruit, and the incorporation of what oak we use to complement all of those things. So just to kind of like back up for a second to Michel's point about blending, even with Cabernet as an example, which is what Napa is known for. We're sourcing Cabernet from almost every sub-appellation within Napa Valley. And what I love about that opportunity is that some of it is the state, some of it is working with growers that we've had long-standing relationships with. And every vintage offers different characteristics in each one of those sub-AVAs and specifically to that vineyard. And while you may see a much more bold tannin in, let's say, Theo's Rutherford Cabernet, you gotta use that line right there, right? Meanwhile, James's Oakville Cab might show a little more fruit forward this year. And as those things develop in the characteristics of the wine, we think about how they're going to come together and what nuances they do. So one year, our Cabernet blend might have more of Theo's in it because of that characteristic. The next year, we might push more of James's into it. And working through our various blends, we consider that balance. And I know balance is an easy word for winemakers to use, but it really is about that, trying to find that with a wine that can also complement cuisine as well.
Wonderful. Michel, to you for that same question. Obviously, when you're consulting on several different projects in several different countries, is there a signature style that you're going for, or do you let the terroir sort of speak for itself and that's your signature style, or is there something that you really try to achieve in each place you go?
So never, my feeling, I think never we have to look for a style. We are looking for the best wine in the location we are. I did in my wife wines at $4.5 on a shelf, and I did wine at $1,200 exceller. So you obviously you are not looking for your signature. You are looking for the best wine you can do at the place you are, and to make the wine the more successful possible, because to make wine, and as a winemaker like I am, is a real business. You know, people are not calling Michel Rolland just because he's Michel Rolland. They are calling Michel Rolland because they want to make business with their wine. So we are not looking for properly for a style. Maybe at the end we can compare. When I'm doing, for example, I'm doing Clos de los Siete, because we are speaking about Clos de los Siete in Argentina. We are doing 1 million bottle. You can imagine it's a completely different blend as when I'm doing a wine with 250 cases in a very high profile wine in Napa Valley. Nothing to compare. And I don't know if we can say the style, because of course Michel Rolland is behind, Michel Rolland is tasting. That's the same palate, but the wines are completely different, and we are not looking for the same. Our goal is not to look for our style, is looking for the wine style, and the wine need to be corresponding at the positioning on the shelf, at the positioning in the market, at the positioning for the wine journalist. You know, we have some critics giving ratings from time to time, and so we can we don't understand them all the time, but no problem. They are in the game, and we are playing with that. So I can say I have a style, and finally I don't know if I have a style. I hope not, because you know, I did wine in China, I did one in India, I did one in Argentina, in Napa Valley, in Bordeaux, obviously, and so it's not maybe it's a style, but I have my taste. But my taste is always looking for the wine and the region where the wine is from. When I taste Napa Valley Cabernet, definitely is not Pauillac Cabernet or somewhere else, or even Cabernet in Italy. That's completely different. So we are not making the style. The style is coming from the soil and from the location where we are.
Thank you. And then James, obviously to you, what are you looking for, and what helps you stand out when you're thinking about blending and thinking about what you're doing there in Sonoma?
Well, I would definitely echo exactly what Glenn said, and Michel kind of put it together as far as, you know, we as winemakers, we do go into this with, you know, obviously a goal and maybe not exactly a style, but to make the very best wine that echoes that varietal. And I think that one of the most important things is that, you know, when we all go into this, we are obviously going to make a wine that echoes, you know, if I'm doing Pinot Noir, it you know, it screams Pinot Noir. We don't want it to scream anything else. And we want it to be food friendly, to Glenn's point, and balanced. And so as we dive into this and speak more about, the art of blending with all these components, that's, as you know, as winemakers, where we start to kind of pinpoint all these little, you know, details and kind of bring them together. So I think we're all on the right track, and we'll dive into more of the components here now.
I was about to say, speaking of details, if you don't mind starting us off with some of the details that you go through when we're talking about the culling. I know we've got some visuals for you to sort of help highlight some of the places we're making wine and some of the ways that you really go through some things. So if you don't mind taking us through some of those visuals and really talking about that process and your thought process when it comes to blending in and ultimately the final product that goes into the culling wines.
Absolutely. So, like I said earlier, where I start, and I think, you know, my fellow peers here would agree, is that we start with, you know, we've got a palate, right? And the palate is our appellation. Where are we going to make these wines from? So we're talking about a number of different appellations here. In my world, for Pinot Noir, for the calling, we're going to focus specifically on Russian River. Russian River also has some other components to it. It's got a sub-AVA called Green Valley, which is sometimes can be a little bit cooler. Parts of it can be a little bit warmer. So we look at this palette and we look at all the vineyards that we're going to be contracting with and making our wines from. And what I look at is kind of the whole picture of cooler climate to warmer climate. For me, Pinot Noir is all about the layers. When you drink Pinot Noir, you know, we all love that varietal for a number of different reasons. But it's supposed to, you know, evoke emotion. It's supposed to evoke thought. It's supposed to be, you know, stimulating in a lot of different ways. And so in order to achieve that, when we're talking about blending, we want to start with vineyards that are, you know, maybe a little bit in the northern part of the Russian River, a little bit warmer, and then kind of in the middle, a little bit cooler, maybe in the southern part in Green Valley where, you know, we can harvest a little bit later and it's a little bit cooler. All these come into play as different elements in the final blend. So, you know, obviously warmer climate fruit's going to give you maybe a little brighter notes, brighter red fruits, cooler climate, longer hang time, a little bit more kind of earth-laden components. And we put all those together, kind of, the final blend is what, is the goal. It's what we're trying to achieve here, keeping in mind all those layers. And so for me, it really starts in the vineyard. It starts with, different sites that lend themselves to different flavor components, aromatics, all of that. And then of course, from vineyards, then we go into clonal selection. Different clones are going to make up, obviously a, different flavored Pinot Noir. From there, it's, time to pick. When are we picking these vineyards? What kind of, characteristics are they bringing to the table? So all this stuff kind of goes into, the thought process before we start tinkering with lots and sitting down and actually, a lot of people think of blending as, we're sitting down at a big table with 100 glasses and, a little of this and a little bit of that, but it really starts back with, the vineyard selection.
I know we'll get into barrels here in a minute, as that's going to be a piece of this, but the one question that I do want to sort of ask a follow-up on with you is when you're thinking about fermentation, I know a lot of what you do is fermenting in oak, and that's a very conscious choice that you've made with some of the wines. Is that because of the flavor that you want at the end, or is that what's coming in at the beginning? So is the fruit itself dictating that you want to put it into a barrel, or is it sort of what you're trying to achieve at the end there, if you understand what I'm sort of asking there?
It's the end result. Yeah. So obviously, in the world of the Chardonnay, for the calling, it is 100% barrel fermented. Yes. And so that is, something that we want to do quality wise. And then of course, expression and characteristic and everything else. Majority of the Pinot Noirs are fermented in stainless steel. But as far as, fermentation techniques and everything else, like to Glenn's point, in the world of Chardonnay and Pinot, we don't really get a whole lot of, ability to do that, the cap drain and the cap swap and things like that. Pinot Noir is pretty straightforward, but that's it's always with the end goal in mind.
Thank you, sir. So we're going to go over the mountain now, and we're going to go into Napa here. So Glenn, if you don't mind talking a little bit about sort of your process and what's going on there as we are looking at the lovely D'Ambrosio vineyard. What goes into your thought process with blending, and how do you get to the final goals with some of the wines at Girard?
Thanks, Theo. Yeah, kind of going to mimic a little bit of what we said previously, and to James's point, I think we start early on in the process. As I mentioned earlier, we're thinking about all the different sub AVAs within our different regions. So here in Napa, sourcing, let's just use Cabernet as an example. I mentioned earlier Rutherford and Oakville. We have mountain regions like Diamond, Atlas Peak, Howell, Mount Veeder. And then some lesser known regions you don't get a lot of notoriety in. St. Helena, I have an amazing Cabernet vineyard that we've been working with since I started at Girard, so 15 years or so now. And having all these different sources are a big part of putting all the tools in our toolbox, which we all like to use that analogy. And having variety in the selections we get to play with. And then beyond just thinking about the single varietal, talking about the fact that we have, the opportunity to use other varietals and blends. And obviously for Girard, we do a red wine blend called Artistry. But even to Michel's point earlier about Cabernet as an example, or Merlot, we're always thinking about what is going to blend into those with other varietals that can help add nuance to that wine. We don't want to change it from being a Cabernet necessarily, but the smallest amount of Merlot, the smallest amount, as you mentioned earlier, I like talking about Petit Verdot because he's kind of the little guy that doesn't get a lot of notoriety. He speaks softly but carries a big stick. So just the smallest amount of that can change a blend and add a lot of different complexity. So we're thinking about that. The vineyard that's on our screen right now, I get Merlot from and Malbec, and it's amazing what those two varietals from that vineyard add to so many of our blends. And we've again been working with them since I started at Girard. So those relationships, having those selection to play with, and we are going to get into barrels a little more, but that's one of the next steps. And as James mentioned, oftentimes blending is just thought of when we get down to a bunch of samples in front of us and start breaking out the beakers and working on what percentage of what. But so much work went in to get to that point and to get all the different selections. I think we all want to walk up to that table at that moment and have as much variety to work with as possible. And sometimes even you may have your favorite lots, but lots that might not have been the standout lot for their own right could turn into the lot that makes the blend even better, just because they have nuances to them that don't make them a complete wine, but in a blend, they add so much to the overall complexity of the wine.
So I know we're going to talk about barrels here in a second, but I do want to skip past the barrel process for just a second with you, Glenn. And one of the interesting things that I've always heard you talk about when we've gone through your Cabernet and Artistry is that you can't really separate them. And the reason you can't is when you're actually going through the blending process with those two wines, you're thinking about them simultaneously. And so can you just talk a little bit about how that thought process works and what makes that sort of unique to what you're doing with those two wines?
Absolutely. Visualizing James's scenario of walking up to that big table, and there's 100 samples in front of us, let's say, and might be exaggerating a little bit, but there's quite a few. And of those, maybe 40 or 50 are Cabernet. Another handful of Merlot, Malbec, Petit Verdot, Cab Franc. And having all of those selections there to walk up and say, okay, I'm making a red wine blend. And for us, Artistry is following those traditional 5 varietal wines blended together. So Cabernet, Merlot, Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. But meanwhile, we also are working on our Girard Napa Valley Cab. And that mentality of, okay, I want to build both those wines kind of simultaneously because I need to make that Cabernet's complexity at the same time I'm making our red wine blends complexity, and know that, certain Cabernet works better in that Artistry blend than it might work in our Cabernet blend. And then the nuances that we'll achieve from Merlot, adding some certain softness, some red fruit, kind of helping balance out tannin structure, Cabernet Franc, adding some amazing, beautiful aromatics, some floral notes, also some nice red fruit. I often talk about our Malbec, that very vineyard, that picture we had a moment ago, adding what I call a donut hole filler of complexity in the mid palate. It just really kind of helps lift up our mid palate. And as I referred to Petit Verdot earlier, aromatically, white floral notes, some nice blue fruit, but on the texture of the wine, it can add a lot of bold structure as well. So thinking about all of those things, and even though artistry is a red wine blend, and we want all of that in there, when we're making our Cabernet blend, we want those opportunities with the Petit Verdot and the Malbec and the Merlot and Franc to all be able to add a little bit of complexity. So oftentimes they are used in the Cabernet blend as well, just obviously in smaller amounts. So they can definitely be a part of that decision-making as well.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. So going to a horse of a completely different color, leaving California and heading down into Argentina, into the lovely Upo Valley, you get to see the campus of Clos de los Siete. So Michel, obviously this project is a very, very unique one in terms of the thought of blending and what's going on there. So can you please talk through what's going on in the Upo Valley, especially with Clos de los Siete, what goes on at the 4 campuses, and what's so unique about this project for you?
So, but first of all, when I decided to do a project in Argentina, was not Upo Valley, but step by step, visiting vineyard and visiting mostly land more than vineyard. One day we decided to buy this piece of land we can see on the picture. That's exactly 2,000 acres, 850 hectares, and so what was much bigger than my first project in my head. But finally we found investors, partners to make this project, and we can see on the picture 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The last one, winery. We have 5 wineries, but today all the wineries are producing their own wine, and 4 of the wineries are producing wine, making Clos de los Siete. And Clos de los Siete is very funny things, but that's my imagination 25 years ago. It's a long time ago already, because you can make the same volume of wine in just one winery with just one enologist. And I thought, because the project was big, it's better to have more winemakers. And so we have, in fact, 4 winemakers, one at Cuvelier Los Andes, one at Monteviero, one at Diamandes, and one at Mariflor. And I am making wine. I'm blending wine as a base for Clos de los Siete in each winery. And after that, we blend all together the 4 wines from the 4 wineries, and we do Clos de los Siete. And where we can see the blend is something really strong and really interesting. Anytime when I'm doing the blend with the winemaker of each winery, they are thinking all the time, and maybe they are right, but I don't want to know exactly. They are thinking all the time the wines from their winery is the best wine. But they are nice guys, because anytime we are doing the final blend and where we blend all together, they tell to me, finally, the final blend is even better than the base blend we had from our winery. And that's a magical thing of the blending. And blending, it's something, there is no magic. That just a work and just a lot of tasting and a lot of understanding in wine. And finally, what is happening in a blend? We have to find the right synergy in between the wine. So that's really a job. And people think we need to take the best and we blend the best and we have the best wine. It's not true. We can sometimes to blend something not really the best, but making a very good synergy in the final blend. That's where the blend is something very, very attractive and very interesting. But that's really a job, and we can't do a blend like this one day to the other. We have to learn, and I think it's a long way. And Clos de los Siete, at the beginning, we imagined to do a blend finally, because many people are thinking is Malbec. It's not Malbec. It's not 100% Malbec. But we decided 50% Malbec, 20% Cabernet Sauvignon, 20% Merlot, 10% Syrah was a picture of Clos de los Siete. In fact, we are moving a little bit, not too much, but we have sometimes little bit less than 50% Malbec, sometimes little bit more. Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Syrah is moving. And since 7-8 years now, we have some Cab Franc getting in, but never over 3, 4, 5%, and some Petit Verdot. So Clos de los Siete is a real blend, is a blend of variety, and is a blend of winery. And that's a perfect example for blending. That's the most complicated blending you can imagine, but that's a perfect example. You know, for a professional blender, more components you have on the table, better you have chance to make the final blend. And I think Clos de los Siete, for me, is sort of game. I love to do that. It takes time because I taste almost 4 times every year all the wines we produce in all the wineries, and I decide the different lots we use to make the base blend, and finally we decide to blend all together. So that's my way of life in Clos de los Siete. That's 20 years now production, and quite successful, not too bad.
So to follow up on some of that, I do have 2 questions where that's concerned. One, obviously each winery has its own section on campus. So was there a discussion when you first started on who was going to be able to go where and why, or did people just sort of get to pick? How did that whole thing start in terms of making sort of the arrangement of what's going on there? And then secondarily, when you're going through the blending process and you're tasting through with these winemakers, how do you manage those very, very different styles? I've tasted wine from all of the campuses, and they are vastly, vastly different in how they're made. So how do you manage that when you're going through that thought process? Is it sort of, do you take a little bit of cue from them in terms of what they're thinking? Is it more of a conversational piece? Is it you going in and deciding, you know what, I think that's going to work best here, so just let me have that? How does that whole piece work?
Yeah, you know, my life is quite easy, but because I found partners, but my partners are my friends, and they all work with me in Bordeaux, first of all, and so they know me very well for many years, and so they trust me, and so after that, I have to discuss. Of course, it's a discussion. In each winery is a discussion with the winemaker, with the owner. The discussion is more with the team than with the owner. But with the team, we are discussing, and we are making wine, because we are making Clos de los Siete, but we are making other wines too. We are making the wine of directly from the winery, like Monteviejo, we are making Monteviejo, Mariflor, we are making Mariflor, but we are making Clos de los Siete inside. And after, Clos de los Siete will be joining 4 wineries to make the final blend. So that's not a big deal, but we are managing that like any kind of winery all over the world, and we are discussing about the vineyard, we are discussing about the picking date, we are discussing about vinification, because obviously in Argentina, like everywhere in the world, not every year is the same, and we have sometimes more maturity, less maturity, good maturity, not so good maturity. So we have more production, less production. So that's exactly the same as we discussed everywhere in the world, but we discuss with 4 winery, and we are making a final blend where we are doing 1 million bottles. That's a big blend, but that's not even more complicated as a small property. That's exactly the same work.
Wonderful, thank you. So there are a couple more questions that I have for you all, but before I get to those, I know that there are some questions that are coming in the chat box, or in the Q&A rather. So I wanted to make sure that we address a few of those. So Lars, if you don't mind queuing me up a little bit.
Sure, thanks Theo. So we have a question from an anonymous attendee who is asking about, when you're looking for a certain blend, you want to, if you have a target idea for style or price point or whatever else it is that you're going for, do any of you ever consider going out of vintage or out of appellation or region, depending on what your denomination allows?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll jump in if that's all right. Out of vintage is one topic I love to talk about, both looking at younger and older. We look at out of vintage as in most of our cases, we can use 5%. There's an exception in California when we're a county designate, as an example, we can go even higher. And I love looking at that as an option for blending. An older vintage, something that's been in barrel for another year or two, obviously can add a lot of depth and complexity to the wine. Even putting in something younger to add some fleshiness and brightness from that younger characteristics of that wine is critical. I think out of vintage is a definite tool in their toolbox that we don't get to talk a lot about, but I planned on bringing it up anyway, so I appreciate whoever asked that. And then appellation, when, to Michel's point earlier, we make some wines that are definitely price point sensitive, and sometimes we're looking at more affordable regions to do so. But even beyond that, it might just be that you happen to have a wine out of the appellation you're listing on the bottle that just, in this blend, it just happens to work and it does everything you need it to do. And in most cases in California, as an example, we've got 15% out of appellation to play with. So that 15% can have a tremendous impact on the overall quality of the wine and the style. And while we don't want to not be our appellation that we are labeling as in that style, even just playing with something that adds a little bit of texture and complexity or fruit forwardness or tannin structure or acidity even is probably one of the biggest topics, to use something out of that appellation. It's a really useful tool. And both appellation and vintage, I think, are a huge part of our toolbox that we get to play with.
Awesome. Does anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, same here. I echo Glenn's, maybe in my world of Chardonnay and Pinot, I don't get that, as much latitude, I think, as the Bordeaux varietals when it comes down to it. But definitely out of appellation, a little bit of blending into the larger lots that we do. And then also vintage, we definitely, any Pinot Noir that gets over vintaged, more of the platinum level, the Vineyard Designate series that sees about 15 to 16 months in French oak. I definitely look at and play around with putting a little bit of the current vintage in, not much, again, to Glenn's point, it's just enough to kind of, make it, a little bit more fresh, a little bit more lively, kind of like, spark it up a little bit. So we look at those things as well.
Very cool.
No, we can say obviously the vintage is very important, and the quality of the wine, of the grapes first of all, and the wine is very important. So we had if we come back to Clos de los Siete, we had few years where instead to have 1 million bottle, we produce 600,000 for a quality reason, because we have not enough wine to reach the quality. So that's the problem, but that's the problem we have almost everywhere in the world. And when we are speaking about the 600,000 instead of 1 million, of course it's a lot of bottle missing, but that's the life. And the quality of the wine is very important. We have a target for the wine. We have a target to. Of course, we have a margin. We don't have. We know all the winemakers maybe better than the rest of people, but we know we are not able to produce exactly the same quality every year. But we try to get the best, but sometimes we do not achieve. And for Clos de los Siete, even we have 2,000 acres. That's a big land, but that's the same place, and we are in the same climatic condition. So sometimes in fact, Clos de los Siete is a estate wine. Is a big estate, obviously, but it's a estate wine, and so it's not so easy year after year to have the same volume, the same quality, the same. So we are playing with that as close as possible for the business result, but is sometimes a little bit tricky.
That's a very good point, and actually it leads to, Theo, if you don't mind, I'm going to throw another question or two in there. Lawrence, Luke is asking about volume, to your point, Michel, saying that, there is, I guess, a perception that smaller is better, but that's clearly not always the case. So what does the role of volume play when you're making a blend?
But, we have, first of all, we have a target. It's not coming like this, because we as you know, in Southern Hemisphere we are picking in February. So I taste the wine first time somewhere in June. I begin a little bit in April, but they are not finished in June. So I have one overview of the wine. I come back in November. I have a second overview. I come back next January, another time, and so we are building the wine, all the wines through the time, and we are watching for the quality we can accept in the range we are. And sometimes at the end we have to know, we have to recognize we have not the quality with the volume we are looking for, and so we have to make the blend for the business, not for the quality need to be there. We need that. When we are making 1 million bottle, we can't do bad. Otherwise, it's terrible in the market, and the return is terrible. So we have to be always at the top. So if we have 600,000 bottle, we have 600,000 bottle. My partner do not like that, but and me either. But that's the way of life, and we can do something else.
Well, I'm gonna throw one more question out, Theo, and then I'm gonna let you get to some of your points. But this one was from Yvonne, and this can almost be a yes or no question. I'm gonna interpret what she's asked here, which is, does blending change the dynamic of how a wine evolves? So would it, if you're working with 100% cab, that's not really a blend, and then now all of a sudden you're putting in different varieties, different vintages, whatever else, does it slow down the development process of the wine, or is it pretty much the same in terms of winemaking?
For me, it's definitely the same. But we can do one mono varietal. We have James making Pinot Noir, so he's making Pinot Noir. We do not blend Pinot Noir with something else. And I love Pinot Noir. I am from Bordeaux, but I love Pinot Noir, and so no problem. But Pinot Noir is, but we can blend Pinot Noir. Like if we are doing, I'm from Pomerol, where Merlot is very often is alone in the bottle, but we are blending Merlot because we have different parcel, we have different age of vines, we have old vines, younger vines, we have more soil with clay, with sand, with whatever, and so finally that's a sort of blend. And if you want to make a wine able to age faster or able to wait longer, we can do that anytime. Even we know what we want really to do, and we have the tools, we have the components to do it. But we are making wine. When we are making great wines, what we call great wines, obviously we are making wines to age. When we are making wines drinkable faster, we are not looking for strong rough tannins or whatever. So that's in mind, and we know how to make stronger, how to make more light wine, more fruity wine, more. We can do that if we have the tools to play with. We can do that.
Awesome. All right, Theo, I'm going to throw it back to you for about 5 minutes. I have one more question that's probably a bit of a bombshell, but so I'll let you get your points in first before we throw a grenade in.
Absolutely. So there are a couple, obviously, there are two sort of big things that I do want to talk about. So we'll go quickly through both of them if we can. But the first one is, once you have the lots, once you understand the fruit that you're working with, how do you approach barrels? How do you approach the different barrels that you're going to be using? Obviously, I know most of you use French oak, but Glenn, you're doing some really interesting things with fusion barrels. James, you are a barrel geek and have, I think, like 14 different barrels that you're using on how many different cooperages. So how does that thought process, and how does what the barrel is going to bring to the ultimate blend, how do you really bring that forward, and how do you think about that? Michel, I'll actually start with you.
Yeah, well, 50 years ago, the barrel was very variable and very important, because some coopers was not so good, and sometimes the influence of the barrel was not so good in the wine. So we had to use some and to avoid some other barrels. Today, my feeling today, I think the quality of the barrel is much more under control, and we have really very good barrel. But it depends of the wine you have, because some wines you have very strong, very tannic, very powerful wine. We can use some barrel. But if we are making, we come back to Pinot Noir. I'm sorry for, but we come back to Pinot Noir. We can't use the same barrel making Pinot Noir as we use making a great Saint-Emilion or a great Pauillac with quite a lot of tannins and texture. So that's where we have to choose. But we can ask to a cooper to make it, because now they know how to do it. And we know how to manage the barrel, like we know how to control the fermentation, how to control the vinification. We are much more performing than before, and because we know most of the process we can use to improve the wine, to improve the aging, to improve the time of aging. So we are much better than we were 30 years ago.
James, since he keeps picking on you, I'm going to come to you next.
I love it. Yeah, it's so important. I think someone spoke earlier about kind of, the tools in the tool chest, what to use. And, when you get down to the art of blending, as we've spoken about, you get to the table and you've got all those samples in front of you. You want to have the most, kind of diverse and, deep selection to work with. And in my world of Pinot, it's not that, broad, but to kind of sum it up to kind of give you a concept here, if I had I do about 30 feet this way, let's say a 6-ton fermenter of Pinot Noir from a vineyard, and I'm going to drain all that free run to a selection of barrels. I'm going to put it into a selection of barrels that are produced specifically for Pinot Noir. So I use barrels that are a little bit more on the elegant side, not more than medium toast. They could be water bent or steam bent rather than fire bent. So they're going to obviously complement that wine. But if I put that wine into 6 different coopers that all made that barrel from the same vineyard with the same toast level, etc., you're gonna have 6 different wines, right? So again, the art of blending, that's one more component that we do. And that's why I like to use a selection, is because when I spoke about Pinot Noir having layers, it's one more component to the winemaking that gives those layers. So they're extremely important. And I think, Theo, last time I told you I was 14, I think I'm up to about 20 now. Because I think, in fact, right before this seminar, a truck was backing in with one more trial barrel, I think. So constantly kind of tinkering with that as well.
That must have been the beeping we heard before.
It could have been, yeah.
And to give context, the last time I was with James was a week ago, and it was 14. So he's gotten a whole lot more barrels since then, which is kind of awesome. So Glenn, to you, obviously you're doing some really cool things down there, but also to ask a little bit of a secondary question. James was talking about if they do 6 different barrels, 6 different coopers, 6 different all of this. Have you ever put something into a barrel and tasted it and gone, I should not have done that? And what did you do with that?
Well, just to answer that specifically, sure. I think we all have. James alluded to trials. I love trials. I love getting presented new opportunities, because you never know when you're going to find your next favorite barrel. And also to add to his point, I mean, you may find something that didn't work in the way you thought it would work for that particular blend, but it doesn't mean that component can still add to something else, to another blend. He brought up a really good point. I gave you that visual of walking up to that table with all those different blends. You go and you taste one of them, and usually that's a composite of that whole lot, right? And you taste it, and you have really great notes on it, and there's things that you love about it, specific reasons why you want to use it in your ultimate blend. Well, for a lot of us, then we take the next step, and this is just adding to his comment. And we go to that lot, and let's say there's 40 barrels in that lot, and you only want half of that lot. You want 20 of those barrels. Well, now we're going to get very specific, and we're going to go and taste each of those barrels. And within that, you're going to find new oak that you may love as an individual barrel on its own, or maybe you don't. Maybe it isn't something that is specifically adding to the blend the way you want to, but at some point we racked all those wines. We usually do it 3 times in its life in our world, and that is adding complexity to the whole blend. About a month after you've racked, that new oak is still imparting characteristics and uniqueness. And as he put it, every one of those barrels, Michel mentioned that we've come so far in the quality levels. So a lot of us have our favorites, but I think a lot of us are open-minded that a cooper that you may work with only on one barrel may come to you with another, and it may become your next favorite thing. And even those that don't work the way you want to go back to your original question, they sometimes have even just a nuance of complexity that offer, an opportunity to work in another one of your blends. And so we don't necessarily always discount them and say, hey, that's perfect. That is exactly the one thing I want. It is about what nuances it can add to the overall blend. I think that's the really important thing about blending that we want to illustrate to everyone, is that there is a lot of complexity to deciding what goes into blending, the blending process. It starts with the grapes in the vineyard and it works its way all the way through that final bottle. But every step of the way, there is nuances that, Michel said earlier, maybe that wine isn't the best wine on its own. And maybe your favorite vineyard and your favorite lot doesn't work in the blend the way you might thought it would this year. And last year was perfect. This year, it's just, there's certain nuances that are different. So when we look at barrels, we realize that and we keep that in mind. And sometimes that'll direct what barrels we choose to go in. Sometimes it'll change our mind on what barrels might work when we finally actually get the chance to taste them.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Well, I know we're coming up on the hour here, but there was a series of questions that happened in the Q&A, and it was actually something I wanted to get to. So I'm really glad that that's a piece of it.
Just
Michel,
one. I have to leave.
we can do just one, and it's about climate
Just
change.
one question.
Yeah,
Hand grenade.
right. Here it is. How is climate change affecting your thought process on blending? I know that obviously all of you are dealing with it. We all are. So since just one, Michel, I'm going to start with you if you don't mind, since you're seeing several different vineyards all over the world. How is climate change affecting you, and how are you combating that in the blending process?
So again, please, I do not hear very well.
Sorry, so climate change.
Tell me the question. Tell me the question again.
How is climate change affecting your thought process on blending, or how you approach a blend, and what are you doing to combat it?
Okay. That's a very that's a good question for the end. But today I consider climate change help us, and mostly in Bordeaux, but all over the world, because we are making very good wines. In the last 20 years, we did more good wines than we did in the last century. And that, I think it's coming from the global warming. And so we are because we can pick ripe, we can pick in good conditions, we have good grapes, so we are making good wine. So today I will tell you, we are not changing our behavior in terms of blending. We have one problem with that. We have almost every year we have the alcohol level going up. So and we don't know yet really how to slow down this evolution, because every year we have a little bit more alcohol coming. So it's not a huge problem, but it's a problem, and certainly will be a problem in the next future, because I don't think we come back in the previous year. So we have every year we have a little bit more dryness. We have a little bit more sugar. We have little. So that's the main problem coming. But today, I say my life is much better has been much better in the last 20 years than 20 years before 2000. Because the 80s and 90s, for me, it was much more complicated to blend well and to make good wines than from 2000 until today. But tomorrow, certainly, the global warming will complicate a little bit our life.
Thank you, Michel. I appreciate it. Glenn or James, if you want to hop in on that, hop on that grenade, you can.
you allowed me to go?
I did. You can go, Michel. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Michel.
Thank you, Michel. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much, and I hope see you soon.
As do we.
Yeah, you know, in the world, and again, my world of Pinot Noir, it's having a big impact because, you know, Pinot Noir, obviously it needs the sun and everything else to, you know, to ripen, to mature, but, you know, Pinot Noir does not like the heat. And so when we look at these very specific areas in the state of California and Oregon, where Pinot Noir thrives, they're obviously, you know, they're very, you know, much cooler areas of the appellation in the state. So with the warming there and, you know, the speed of which, you know, some of these vineyards are ripening, I'm, you know, harvesting vineyards in September last month that I historically would always pick in October. It's something that we've seen for 5 or 6, 7 years now. And so we've been living with it, and we've been learning with it. But to Michel's point, it's still giving us a lot to work with. We're in California. We're still going to get ripeness. It's about tempering it and managing it. But it is giving us some pretty incredible, you know, fruit and flavors and everything else to work with.
Glenn, obviously to you.
Thanks, Theo. I guess for all of us thinking about what it impacts on the characteristics of our wines, and you know, for the topic here being blending and what it would do, what we do to try and combat that. You know, there's definitely vintages that we've had in my tenure here at Girard that have been impacted by the weather, and what we've had to do to kind of shift and adjust lends to this conversation about blending and decisions we make. James is talking about pick dates. You know, obviously we have to look at things differently and when we pick. Now, you may be going earlier. In some cases, we have issues where we can't get the fruit to be at the level of balance of acidity and ripeness. I mean, just having sugar is one thing. We're having a vintage like that right now here in Napa and Sonoma, for that matter, where we're seeing, you know, some ripeness just climb. Brix is going up immediately over the last few weeks with some big heat waves we've had, and then we've had these cool off periods, which we're in one right now, where it's literally going to be 71 degrees here in Calistoga, which is crazy for the beginning of October, and so we're seeing these Brix levels jump, but the acidity isn't balanced in the fruit and the complexity of the fruit. You know, there's the ripeness that we look for the flavor versus the ripeness we look for as sugar level. And so trying to balance that out and avoid hitting weather patterns where we suddenly get a slew of rain. And then of course, you know, the one probably more disparaging conversation of fires here. You know, we're all just sitting on pins and needles, hoping that we don't have to deal with that again, and what the challenges that brings to us. And I'm literally having moments where I'm like, well, I'd like to let these grapes stay out there a little longer, so I can try, even though the Brix is high, so I can try and get some more complexity and balance out the acidity here. But wow, you know, the longer I wait, the longer there's a problem with the weather that could completely be detrimental. And that's always been the case for us, but I think we all think about it a lot more these days. And in our world, specifically James and I's, Napa and Sonoma, fires are in the back of your mind. As soon as you get any kind of alert on your phone, you know, just like my tension just rises and my shoulders get all tense because I'm just worried that's the next big problem we're going to have to contend with. And knock on wood, we haven't had any major issues this year, but it's pushing us to make decisions that we would have looked at differently in the past, for sure.
So, well, thank you guys for joining. I appreciate it. It's always nice to see you all. Lars, I'm going to pass it back to you to close us out, but it's great to see you guys. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Theo. Thank you, Theo, for bringing our discussion to fruition and for putting together this amazing panel. Thank you, James. Thank you, Glenn. And thank you, Michel, wherever you are, for your time today, especially during this very busy harvest season. And thank all our attendees for taking the time to tune in and listen to us, whether it's now or on the recording, which I remind you, you can see at sommjournal.com or through the Somm Foundation or Deutsche Family Wines website, and on Facebook Live. The print recap will be in the February 2022 SOMM Journal, written by one of the greatest writers there. Just kidding, that'll be me. But I can't wait to write this because there was some fascinating information, thought-provoking stuff coming out of this panel. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks,
Take care,
Lars.
all.
Thanks, Lars.
Good to
Thank
see
you
you,
all.
Glenn.
You too, James.
Hang
Take
in
care.
there.
Good harvest.
You too.